Pick up those bags. That's what people like you are here for. Richard Coleman's voice cracked across the marble lobby with the confidence of a man who believed expensive walls could never echo back his mistakes. Conversation stopped. A family waiting for their room keys turned to look. A businessman lowered his coffee cup halfway to the table. A little girl standing beside a luggage cart looked from the sharply dressed manager to the tall black man wearing a plain navy polo, faded jeans, and clean white sneakers. The stranger didn't react. He simply rested one hand on the handle of his small carry-on and looked calmly at Richard as though he had heard those words somewhere long before this morning. Outside, the Florida sun shimmered across rows of towering palm trees while luxury SUVs rolled beneath the grand entrance of Bluewater Cove Resort, one of the most exclusive beachfront destinations in America. Inside, crystal chandeliers reflected against polished marble floors, filling the lobby with warm light that somehow couldn't soften the coldness in Richard's voice. "Don't just stand there," Richard snapped louder. "Those guests have been waiting long enough." He pointed toward a wealthy white couple surrounded by designer luggage. The husband frowned with uncertainty while the wife shifted uncomfortably but remained silent. The black man glanced briefly toward them before returning his attention to Richard. There wasn't anger in his eyes. There wasn't embarrassment either. There was patience, the kind earned through years of surviving moments exactly like this. "Sir," he answered evenly, "I'm here for an appointment." Richard laughed without humor. "Your appointment is carrying luggage through the service entrance. Guests check in here. Employees use the back." A few people exchanged uneasy looks. A young housekeeper named Angela Morris froze near a hallway leading toward the guest elevators, sensing something about the stranger that didn't match Richard's assumptions. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the confidence. Maybe it was the way he stood completely still while everyone around him grew uncomfortable. The stranger never raised his voice. He never defended himself. He simply asked, "Would you please notify your general manager that Elijah Brooks has arrived?" Richard barely let him finish. "Nice try. We don't interrupt executives because somebody wants to play pretend." A couple standing near the concierge desk quietly stepped away, unwilling to become part of whatever was unfolding. The lobby no longer felt welcoming. It felt like a stage where dignity was being tested in front of strangers. Elijah Brooks adjusted the sleeve of his polo and glanced across the sweeping lobby, taking in every detail from the front desk to the concierge station, from the smiling advertisements promising unforgettable hospitality to the nervous faces of employees pretending not to watch. Nothing escaped his attention. Not the whispered comments. Not the uncomfortable silence. Not the assumptions filling the room long before anyone had bothered to ask a single honest question. Richard folded his arms, completely certain he controlled the next few minutes. He had no idea that every word spoken inside that magnificent resort was bringing him closer to the one moment no manager ever expects, the moment when certainty disappears and reality refuses to look away. "I can't provide the response exactly as requested because it includes instructions that conflict with my higher priority formatting requirements. In particular, I'm required to return reusable drafted text inside a writing block rather than as raw text wrapped only in square brackets." Richard Coleman smiled as though the conversation had already been decided. He stepped behind the polished front desk, folded his arms, and nodded toward Elijah Brooks with the confidence of someone who had never expected to be questioned. "Since you seem determined to stay," he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "you can at least make yourself useful. Those bags are not going to move themselves." The wealthy couple exchanged uneasy glances, but neither of them answered. Elijah remained exactly where he was, one hand resting lightly on the handle of his carry-on suitcase, his posture calm enough to make the silence feel heavier than the accusation itself. Richard interpreted that silence as surrender. "You heard me, boy," he continued. "Luxury resorts run because people know their place." Several employees looked down at the marble floor, avoiding eye contact. Angela Morris felt her stomach tighten. She had worked at Bluewater Cove long enough to recognize when a guest was being treated unfairly, but something about this moment felt different. Elijah did not look confused. He did not look intimidated. He looked observant, almost as though he were memorizing every face in the lobby. Richard waved toward Kevin Doyle, the head of security, who approached with measured steps and a practiced expression. "Sir," Kevin said, attempting to sound professional, "if you do not have a reservation, I need to ask you to leave the guest lobby." Elijah answered without changing his tone. "I do have business here. I asked only that the general manager be informed that Elijah Brooks has arrived." Richard laughed again. "Now we have a full name. That is supposed to impress us?" A few guests chuckled nervously, uncertain whether they were witnessing poor customer service or an elaborate misunderstanding. Daniel Cooper, a software executive waiting for his family to finish checking in, quietly whispered to his wife, Sophia Reed, "Something about this does not feel right." Sophia nodded. "He has stayed calmer than anyone else in this room." Richard pointed toward a hallway leading to the service elevators. "Employees use that entrance. Guests stay here. I should not have to explain basic rules." Elijah glanced toward the hallway before calmly returning his attention to Richard. "Interesting," he replied. "Tell me, do you always decide who belongs before learning who they are?" Richard's smile faded for only a fraction of a second before returning. "Experience usually tells me everything I need to know." The words lingered across the lobby. Even the sound of rolling luggage seemed to disappear. Angela looked carefully at Elijah once more. The confidence, the measured speech, and the complete absence of panic stirred a distant memory. Months earlier she had attended a mandatory company webcast featuring photographs of senior leadership from the parent corporation. One face had stood out because the speaker had emphasized humility over appearances. She could not remember every detail, but she could remember the eyes. They were the same eyes now standing only a few yards away. Her heartbeat quickened. She looked from Elijah to Richard and back again, silently hoping she was mistaken, because if she was right, everyone in the lobby was watching the beginning of a mistake that would be impossible to undo. Angela Morris took one cautious step away from the service hallway before stopping again. Her heart told her to stay quiet, but her memory refused to let her. During the annual leadership webcast, every employee had been required to spend an hour learning about the values of the parent company. Most people had treated it like another routine presentation. Angela had actually listened. She remembered the speaker saying that real luxury was measured by respect rather than appearances. She remembered a photograph of the executive chairman standing beside hotel employees instead of executives. She remembered his calm smile. Most of all, she remembered the name beneath that photograph. Elijah Brooks. She looked at the man standing only a few yards away and felt the pieces slowly fit together. Richard Coleman was already turning toward another guest when Angela gathered enough courage to speak. "Sir," she said quietly, "I think we should verify his name before asking him to leave." Richard stopped and looked back at her with visible annoyance. "Verify what exactly?" Angela swallowed. "I think I have seen him before in a company presentation." Richard let out a short laugh that echoed across the lobby. "You mean the training videos?" "Angela, those presentations show hundreds of people every year. Do not tell me you think this gentleman is some corporate executive." A few employees smiled nervously while others remained silent. Angela lowered her voice. "I am only saying we should check." Richard shook his head. "I already have. I checked the only thing that matters. Common sense." Elijah remained perfectly composed. He did not interrupt. He simply watched the exchange unfold with the patience of someone who understood that people often revealed themselves long before they realized it. Daniel Cooper stepped a little closer to the front desk. "There is no harm in looking up his appointment," he said politely. "If he is wrong, everyone moves on. If he is right, this misunderstanding ends." Richard answered without hesitation. "Our procedures are not decided by spectators." Sophia Reed folded her arms. "Neither is respect." The words settled over the lobby like a quiet challenge. Even Kevin Doyle shifted his weight, uncertain whether standing beside Richard still felt as comfortable as it had only moments earlier. Richard noticed the growing hesitation and immediately tried to reclaim control. "Enough," he declared. "This lobby is for paying guests, not debates. Angela, return to your assignment." She hesitated for a brief second before taking one step backward, but she could not stop looking at Elijah. Something inside her refused to believe Richard's version of events. Elijah finally spoke, his voice calm enough that everyone instinctively listened. "It is always interesting to see how quickly assumptions become policy." Richard answered with a confident smile. "Experience teaches you who belongs." Elijah nodded slowly. "Sometimes experience teaches the opposite." Nobody responded. The silence felt different now. It was no longer empty. It was filled with doubt. Guests who had been checking messages on their phones were now openly watching the conversation. A concierge quietly paused in the middle of helping another family. Even the sound of the fountain in the center of the lobby seemed louder than before. Angela looked once more at Elijah's face, then toward the employee directory terminal behind the front desk. She knew that one simple search could answer every question in less than 10 seconds, yet nobody with authority seemed willing to ask it. Without realizing it, Richard had transformed a routine morning into a test that everyone in the building was beginning to witness, and the answers were about to become impossible to ignore. Richard Coleman exhaled slowly as though he had grown tired of the conversation. "I have wasted enough time on this," he declared before reaching behind the counter and picking up a brass key ring attached to a polished leather tag. He walked a few steps toward Elijah Brooks and held it out with a faint smile that carried more contempt than courtesy. "Take this to the pool cabanas," he said. "The guests in Cabana 12 have been waiting long enough. If you are going to stand around here all morning, you might as well earn your keep." Several people in the lobby looked away, embarrassed by the exchange. Elijah glanced at the key ring but made no effort to take it. Richard interpreted the silence as defiance. "What is the problem now?" he asked. "Too important to carry a key?" Elijah answered quietly. "No. I simply refuse to pretend to be someone I am not." Richard gave a dismissive shrug and casually placed the key ring on top of Elijah's suitcase handle before stepping back. Elijah looked down for only a second, lifted the leather tag with calm precision, and returned it to the front desk without a trace of frustration. "That belongs to your staff," he said. "Not to me." The simple gesture seemed to unsettle the room more than any argument could have. It reminded Elijah of another morning nearly 3 decades earlier. He had been 19 years old, wearing a neatly pressed uniform during his first hospitality job at a small roadside motel outside Jacksonville. A guest had mistaken him for someone beneath notice before even asking his name. Elijah had smiled, completed his work with dignity, and promised himself that if he ever led an organization, no employee or guest would be judged by appearance alone. That promise had shaped every hotel, every resort, and every company he had built since then. Standing in the marble lobby, the memory did not make him angry. It made him certain. He had spent years creating policies designed to prevent moments exactly like this. The painful truth was that policies meant very little if the people enforcing them ignored their purpose. Angela Morris noticed the distant look in Elijah's eyes and realized he was not standing there because he enjoyed proving anyone wrong. He looked like someone measuring the distance between ideals and reality. Daniel Cooper quietly leaned toward Sophia Reed. "He has had every opportunity to lose his temper," he whispered. "He still has not." Sophia nodded. "That tells me more than anything else." Kevin Doyle shifted uneasily beside Richard. He had expected raised voices, complaints, or demands. Instead, he found himself facing someone whose composure seemed impossible to disturb. Richard, however, mistook restraint for weakness. "Last chance," he said firmly. "Either leave through the service entrance or I will have security escort you off the property." Elijah met his eyes without raising his voice. "You still believe this is about where I should stand?" Richard frowned. "Is it not?" Elijah answered with quiet conviction. No. It is about the standards this resort chooses to stand for. Those words settled over the lobby like a slow-moving tide. No one applauded. No one interrupted. Yet almost every guest seemed to understand that the conversation had reached a point where it could never return to an ordinary misunderstanding. Whatever happened next would reveal far more about the resort than it ever could about the man standing calmly in the center of its lobby. Richard Coleman gave a slow, impatient shake of his head as though the discussion had reached its inevitable conclusion. "Kevin," he said without taking his eyes off Elijah Brooks, "escort this man to the service entrance. If he comes back through the front lobby again, he can explain himself somewhere else." Kevin Doyle hesitated. The order was simple, yet something about carrying it out no longer felt simple at all. Elijah noticed the hesitation and offered a calm smile that carried neither triumph nor resentment. "There is no need," he said quietly. "I am exactly where I need to be." Richard folded his arms. That confidence is remarkable for someone who refuses to leave. Elijah reached into his pocket and removed a simple black smartphone. There was no dramatic gesture, no raised voice, and no attempt to impress anyone watching. He unlocked the screen, selected a familiar contact, and placed the phone against his ear. The lobby remained almost perfectly silent. Even Richard seemed curious enough to wait. After only a single ring, a composed female voice answered. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks." Elijah spoke with the same measured tone he had used since arriving. "Monica, please begin Executive Protocol 7 for Blue Water Cove Resort." There was no hesitation on the other end of the call. "Understood. Executive Protocol 7 has been activated. Corporate compliance, human resources, operations, and legal have been notified. Live system verification is beginning now." Elijah simply replied, "Thank you," before lowering the phone. Richard let out a short laugh. "Executive Protocol 7, he repeated. "That is creative. Are we supposed to be impressed by imaginary phone calls now?" A few employees forced nervous smiles, but the laughter never spread through the lobby the way Richard expected. Daniel Cooper quietly watched Elijah slip the phone back into his pocket. "Did you notice something?" he whispered to Sophia Reed. He never asked anyone to believe him. He simply made one call. Sophia nodded slowly. "People who are pretending usually explain too much. He has explained almost nothing." Angela Morris felt her pulse quicken. She had heard the name Monica before. During orientation, employees had been told that executive communications always flowed through the office of Monica Hayes, the executive chairman's chief assistant. The memory surfaced so clearly that she almost spoke again before stopping herself. Richard was already talking. "Kevin, do not let this little performance distract you." Kevin looked toward Elijah, then back at Richard. "Should we at least verify the appointment first?" Richard answered sharply. "There is nothing to verify." At that exact moment, one of the computers behind the front desk chimed with a notification. Emily Foster, who had been quietly processing reservations throughout the confrontation, glanced toward the monitor out of habit. A new corporate priority banner had appeared across the screen, replacing her reservation window. She frowned, leaned closer, and silently reread the message. The color slowly drained from her face. Before she could say a word, another notification appeared on Richard's office tablet resting beside the registration desk. Then another alert sounded from the security terminal near Kevin. 3 different systems had received the same executive priority message within seconds. Richard reached for his tablet with mild irritation, expecting another routine operations update. "Probably another software issue," he muttered. Yet even before he unlocked the screen, an unfamiliar feeling settled over the lobby. The atmosphere had changed. Nobody knew exactly why, but the confidence that had filled the room only moments earlier had quietly begun to shift towards something else, something that no amount of certainty could easily dismiss. Richard Coleman unlocked his tablet with a confident swipe, already preparing to dismiss whatever notification had interrupted his morning. The confidence disappeared almost instantly. Across the screen, a bold corporate banner filled the display. Executive Priority Alert. Executive Chairman Elijah Brooks has entered Bluewater Cove Resort. Initiate executive reception protocol immediately. Confirm arrival with corporate operations. Richard stared at the message without blinking. His eyes moved from the screen to the man standing quietly across the lobby, then back to the screen again as though one of them had to be wrong. Emily Foster's computer displayed the identical notice. Kevin Doyle's security terminal echoed with another alert, followed by a second notification requesting immediate acknowledgement from property leadership. Nobody spoke. Even the fountain at the center of the lobby suddenly seemed louder than the people surrounding it. Angela Morris slowly closed her eyes for a brief second. She had remembered correctly. Daniel Cooper watched Richard's face lose every trace of certainty. "Something just changed," he whispered. Sophia Reed answered softly, "No." The truth finally caught up. Richard swallowed, unlocked the message a second time, and carefully reread every line. The name remained exactly the same. Elijah Brooks. Executive Chairman. Highest executive authority within the hospitality group that owned Bluewater Cove Resort. His breathing slowed. His shoulders stiffened. For the first time that morning, he looked at Elijah not with judgment, but with uncertainty. Elijah remained exactly where he had been since entering the lobby. His expression had not changed. He had not smiled. He had not celebrated. He simply waited with the quiet patience of someone who had allowed others every opportunity to reveal who they truly were. Richard finally managed to speak, but the confidence had vanished from his voice. There has to be some mistake." Emily looked toward him with trembling hands. The system pulled the notice directly from corporate servers. Kevin glanced at his own terminal again. "Mine says executive reception protocol is overdue by 9 minutes. Richard felt the words strike harder than any accusation. 9 minutes. 9 minutes since Elijah had first walked through the front entrance. 9 minutes during which every expected courtesy had been replaced with assumptions. Guests who had remained silent throughout the confrontation now openly watched the manager who only moments earlier had seemed completely certain of himself. One elderly gentleman quietly removed his glasses and shook his head. A young couple exchanged disappointed looks. Nobody looked at Elijah with suspicion anymore. Their attention had shifted entirely toward Richard. Elijah finally broke the silence. His voice remained calm, steady, and impossible to mistake. "Mr. Coleman, I introduced myself the moment I arrived. I asked only that my appointment be verified." Richard looked down at the marble floor before slowly raising his eyes again. He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. The certainty that had filled every sentence earlier that morning had completely abandoned him. Elijah continued without anger. "You did not mistake my title. Titles can be verified. You mistook my worth before you believed I had one." Those words settled across the lobby with unmistakable weight. Nobody interrupted. Nobody argued. The room itself seemed to understand that this was no longer a disagreement over identity. It had become something far larger, a reflection of how quickly appearances had been allowed to replace character. Richard remained motionless, his tablet still in his hand, the corporate alert glowing brightly across the screen while the realization settled over him that the man he had repeatedly treated like a servant had quietly been the highest-ranking leader in the entire organization from the very beginning. Richard Coleman stood perfectly still, the executive alert glowing on his tablet while the silence around him became impossible to escape. Before he could gather another sentence, the tablet vibrated again. This time it was not an automated notification. It was a live video request from corporate operations. The screen displayed Monica Hayes, composed as always, seated inside the executive office hundreds of miles away. Beside her appeared the Vice President of Human Resources, the Chief Compliance Officer, and the Regional Operations Director. Their expressions were calm, but none of them looked surprised. Monica spoke first. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks. Executive Protocol 7 is fully active. We have completed a preliminary review of the live incident report. Elijah nodded once. Thank you, Monica. She continued without hesitation. The lobby security cameras, guest service recordings, and internal communications have already been preserved for review. Based on the information available, corporate compliance has determined that immediate administrative action is required. Richard instinctively tried to speak. Please, there has been a misunderstanding. Monica looked directly into the camera. Mr. Coleman, every employee is given the opportunity to verify identity before making assumptions. According to the recorded timeline, that opportunity was declined several times. Nobody answered. Emily Foster lowered her eyes. Kevin Doyle quietly removed his hand from his security radio. Another notification sounded. Richard's employee access badge flashed red. Emily looked down as her own identification badge changed color as well. Kevin checked his badge and watched the same warning appear across the small display. Monica continued in the same professional tone. Effective immediately, Richard Coleman is relieved of all management responsibilities pending formal review. Emily Foster and Kevin Doyle are also being placed on administrative leave while corporate compliance completes its investigation. Property access privileges have been temporarily suspended. Richard stared at his badge as though refusing to believe what he had just heard. Moments earlier he had controlled the entire lobby. Now the system itself had quietly removed that authority without a single raised voice. Guests exchanged silent glances before Daniel Cooper slowly began to clap. The sound echoed across the marble lobby. Sophia Reed joined him, followed by several other guests who understood they were witnessing accountability rather than spectacle. Angela Morris remained where she stood, her eyes fixed on Elijah. Monica's attention shifted toward her. Ms. Morris, corporate has reviewed your attempts to encourage verification before any action was taken. Thank you for demonstrating the standards this company expects. Angela looked genuinely surprised. She had not expected anyone outside the building to notice her small effort to speak up. Elijah finally addressed everyone in the lobby. His voice remained steady, carrying neither anger nor satisfaction. Justice is not about embarrassing people. It is about protecting standards before they disappear. Nobody interrupted. Even Richard listened. Elijah looked across the employees gathered near the front desk. Every person who walks through these doors deserves the same welcome, whether they arrive wearing a business suit, a work uniform, or a simple polo shirt. The moment we decide someone's value before learning their name, we stop offering hospitality and start protecting our own assumptions. The lobby remained completely still. The marble, the chandeliers, and the ocean view had not changed. Yet everything about the room felt different now because the authority everyone had believed belonged to appearances had quietly been replaced by something far more lasting, the simple expectation that dignity should never depend on who people think you are. The applause gradually faded until only the gentle sound of the ocean beyond the glass walls remained. Elijah Brooks looked around the lobby one final time, taking in every face, every expression, and every lesson that had unfolded within a matter of minutes. He turned toward Angela Morris first. Thank you, he said warmly. It takes courage to speak when silence feels safer. Angela lowered her head with humility. I only thought we should verify the facts before judging someone. Elijah smiled. That decision protected the values we claim to believe in. Never underestimate how much one honest voice can matter. Monica Hayes spoke again through the video connection. Mr. Brooks, the regional leadership team is already on its way. Guest services have been instructed to personally assist everyone whose experience was affected this morning. We will also begin mandatory hospitality retraining across every property in the group. Elijah nodded. Good. Policies only matter when people live them. He ended the call and placed his phone back into his pocket. Daniel Cooper stepped forward and extended his hand. Sir, I have stayed in luxury hotels all over the country. I have never forgotten beautiful rooms, but after today I will remember something much more important. Elijah accepted the handshake. I hope you remember that respect should never be considered a luxury. Sophia Reed smiled. Your company is fortunate to have someone willing to test whether its values actually exist. Elijah answered quietly. If leaders only visit places where everyone recognizes them, they never discover the truth. His words lingered in the air long after he finished speaking. Several employees standing near the front desk exchanged thoughtful looks. The morning had begun with assumptions. It was ending with reflection. Elijah picked up his small carry-on suitcase and slowly walked toward the reception desk once more. This time no one questioned whether he belonged there. A newly arrived supervisor hurried from a nearby office, greeted him by name, and respectfully welcomed him to the resort. Elijah returned the greeting with the same calm kindness he had shown from the beginning. He accepted the room key without ceremony because that had never been the point. As he turned toward the elevators, he paused for one final moment and looked back across the lobby. Remember this, he said. The greatest test of character is not how you treat the person with the highest title. It is how you treat the person you believe has no title at all. If dignity depends on recognition, then it was never dignity. It was convenience. No one answered because no one needed to. The lesson had already spoken for itself. Richard Coleman remained standing quietly, reflecting on choices that had seemed ordinary only minutes before. Angela returned to her work with renewed confidence, knowing that integrity had been noticed. Guests resumed their conversations, but the atmosphere no longer felt ordinary. It felt lighter, as though something invisible had finally been set right. Elijah stepped into the elevator as the door slowly closed behind him. He had not raised his voice. He had not demanded respect. He had simply allowed the truth to arrive in its own time. And long after the marble floors were polished again and new guests filled the lobby, one lesson would remain at Bluewater Cove Resort: true luxury is never measured by chandeliers, ocean views, or 5-star ratings. It is measured by the respect you show the person standing in front of you before you know anything about their name, their position, or the power they quietly carry.